In Homestead, Florida, stands one of this generation's megalithic structures, built by a single man named Ed Leedskalnin. First in Florida City, he relocated the entire castle to Homestead, Florida, where he completed the work. Frequently compared to the pyramids at Giza, the heads of Easter Island, and Stonehenge, we look at Coral Castle. One giant question remains. How did he build this? The only first-hand accounts that we have of other people watching Ed work is only at night, where he has been said to sing to the stones that now make up what he called Rock Gate. Many of these single pieces of rock weigh over 1,000 tons, and the question remains, how did he do this? We explore this question among many other questions about the nature of our reality, hidden technology, mathematics, and the world energy grid. Come along with me on this journey as we look into just how Ed Leedskalnin created Coral Castle. Hello everyone, welcome to the Yissel Missile Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are at part 20 of the Coral Castle Deep Dive series. Today we're reading again from The Energy Grid by Bruce L. Cathie. We're going to get through 3 short chapters today, so should be pretty fun. And again, this is where we're at in the book. So we are roughly halfway through. So I'm excited to say that we may finish by the end of July or early August before we move on to the anti-gravity book that was also recommended in the initial reading of the Coral Castle book I picked up from the gift shop. So, again, I hope you're all doing well. Make sure to like this video. It helps with the algorithms. It helps this channel grow. And if you're not a subscriber yet, please subscribe. Make sure you hit the bell notification so that you do get notified when I go live. And other than that, if you're interested in this sort of thing with the deep dives, I have Thursday deep dives that I do on the Bermuda Triangle, and I'll be having a new deep dive series on Saturdays, but that won't start until mid-July. So all that's left after that are Sundays for Let's Talk About It, and we'll be having a new installment of Madness Hour, which will be a live stream. That's tomorrow at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. So today we are looking into chapter 13. And that chapter is titled Space Communication. And I'm just going to fix up the video here, and then we shall get started. Hey Ivy, good to see you. Okay. So all that's left to do now is to get our music going. There we go. So yes, chapter 13 is titled Space Communication, but we're also going over chapter 14, Where Have All the Flyers Gone? And chapter 15, People We Would Like to Know More About. And again, these are all short chapters, so we should get through them fairly quickly today. But let's start, shall we? Chapter 13, Space Communication. The scientists are now beginning to agree publicly that we are not alone in the universe. Millions of worlds similar to ours must exist, and the odds are that on many of them, life has developed in much the same way as it has on Earth. Some civilizations will be just beginning, others will be far in advance of our achievements here, and possibly many of them have reached the stage of traveling freely across the vast reaches of space. Our own progress has been fairly rapid in the last century, and it won't be long before we will be ready to try our first venture into deep space. If we do have neighbors, our first step will be to communicate by means of transmitted signals before we take the more difficult step of building vehicles to take us there. In fact, if we would communicate in some way, we might possibly gain vital information from a more advanced race that would enable us to carry out a probe into deep space much sooner. The problem is, by what method and with what type of transmission can this be accomplished most efficiently? Normal radio transmission is not the answer, as vast amounts of power and extremely expensive equipment are required to broadcast a signal for any distance. Even at the speed of light, a time factor is involved if we hope to contact many of the nearest star systems. Communication is not a very practical prospect if we have to wait many years for a reply. The best and most efficient method, as I see it, is to devise a system whereby the communication frequencies are tuned to the structure of matter and the harmonic waveforms that permeate all space. With the correct aerial system and frequency ratios to match, it may be possible to find a shortcut to reach far distant worlds which interest us. Our planet is a resonating ball of waveforms tuned to the unified fields of space, so what better antenna could we use to broadcast intelligent signals through the cosmos than the Earth itself? If a method could be found to superimpose coded waveforms within the natural grid of the Earth, then they would permeate through space within the electromagnetic fields which join all the planetary bodies of the universe. To do this, we would have to pick a geometric position on the Earth's surface, which would be harmonically associated with the structure of the atom. Then we would have to design an aerial system that would enable us to resonate the whole world. It would then become a spherical broadcasting antenna of immense potential, causing any signal imposed upon it to be spread throughout the galaxy. It is possible that, unbeknown to the United States Navy, they have solved the problem. With our present technology and a few $1 million, the job can be done. In the 16th of August, 1973 edition of The New Scientist, I found an article headed, "New Home for America's Doomsday Radio. Project Sanguine," spelled Sanguine. The transmitters proposed for sending the retaliation signal to America's missile submarines following a nuclear attack has quietly slipped back into gear, having been held up for 4 years by environmental protests. 2 new sites have been selected for the aerials that spread over literally thousands of square miles and beam their submarine messages through the Earth's crust. Project Sanguine, as it is known, will, if and when completed, enable the President of the United States to activate his second strike missile submarine force lying hidden in deep canyons on the ocean bottom. It will provide the only remaining communications link between a continental America destroyed by a nuclear first strike and the deeply submerged submarine fleet, which will then hurl retaliation against its aggressor. Sanguine will use extraordinarily low frequencies, somewhere between 30 and 100 hertz, which have never before been used for communications purposes. Their great advantage is that they will propagate through the Earth's crust, penetrating the ocean bed from below, providing radio communications with deeply submerged submarines for the first time. Sanguine's buried aerials will have to cover an area of anything up to 100 miles square, and will have to carry currents so strong that in early experiments they ring telephone bells, interfered with TV reception, and electrified fences on the surface above. The Navy has awarded contracts worth $3 million for design proposals for a system and expects to place full-scale development contracts next year. Again, you have to keep in mind the time frame of this book here. If we go by the revised edition, this is 1997. Sanguine's use of frequencies previously employed only on national security grids and electricity grids. Let me reread that. Sanguine's use of frequencies previously employed only on national electricity grids is only an extreme example of a long-term trend in radio communications with submarines. Conventional MF, HF, and VHF waves are rapidly absorbed by seawater and cannot be used. But even before the First World War, it was realized that about 40 kilohertz attenuation rapidly falls off and communication becomes impossible. As the frequency is reduced from 40 to 10 kilohertz, attenuation falls from 2.2 to 1.1 decibels per foot. All naval powers have long had stations operating in the lower part of this frequency band. Unfortunately, any radio aerial, if it is to be an efficient radiator, must have a length equal to at least 1/4 of the wavelength of the radio wave to be transmitted. At these frequencies, the wavelengths are so enormous, say 20 miles, that this is physically not possible. very low frequency, or VLF, stations are all of great size and use very high power to compensate for the low efficiency of their aerials. By 1969, several Project Sanguine research teams were in existence. RCA had $4.3 million contract to run a test facility. The U.S. Navy had $20 million put on one side for research in the following year. And there was talk of a final $1,500 million system. So I think we're saying $1.5 billion. The idea was to bury the aerial cables below the surface in a 22,000 square mile grid, measuring 150 miles by 150 miles. The rectangles of the grid pattern would be 8 miles by 8 miles, and at each crossover point there would be a buried amplifier feeding current into the grid. Maximum current flow would be 300 amps, and this would create a magnetic field of 1 Gauss and an electromagnetic field of 0.35 volt per meter. The Navy has selected 2 possible sites for the aerial grid. One is atop the so-called Llano Uplift, spelt L-L-A-N-O, a non-conducting rock formation 45 miles northwest of Austin, Texas. The other is in the Upper Michigan Peninsula, where the bedrock is part of the Laurentian Shield, and this is spelled L-A-U-R-E-N-T-I-A-N. Total power will be of the order of 10 megawatts. The information given indicates that the best area to build the grid antenna would depend on the type of rock strata below ground level. The right type of strata would act as a waveguide, it is suggested. According to my research, the type of rock strata would have no effect on the transmission of the radio waves. The factor, as I see it, that would control the efficiency of the system would be the latitude and longitude of the position chosen. Because of this, I believe that the site suggested northwest of Austin, Texas, would be an ideal location for the job. In my earlier books, I had shown a position northwest of Austin, which would give a series of grid harmonics. Now, many years later, I have access to much more information which enables me to calculate a more accurate position, which is displaced only slightly from the original. The diagram will show that the latitude sets up a harmonic geometric, which is directly related to twice the speed of light, 288. The speed of light in free space being 144,000 minutes of arc per grid second relative to the Earth's surface. The speed of light, according to grid theory, varies from 144,000 minutes of arc per grid second in free space to 143,795.77 minutes of arc per grid second at the Earth's surface. And in parentheses it says, "See my work, The Bridge to Infinity." So that's another book that is recommended here. And that's by Bruce L. Cathie. The great circle distance between the antenna position and longitude 180 degrees west at the same latitude is 4,116.36 minutes of arc. A study of all my works will show that the square of this number gives a harmonic value of 169,444. Other sections of my published data will show that this harmonic is directly related to mass, gravity, and communication wavelengths. A further, most important fact is that the great circle distance between the antenna position of grid pole B in the north is the harmonic of twice the speed of light at the Earth's surface, or 2,875.9 minutes of arc. Grid pole B is displaced 694.44 minutes of arc from the north geographic pole, which is the reciprocal harmonic of the speed of light in free space. The interaction of all these factors would ensure that all transmissions from the theoretical position would set up unified fields harmonized with the geometric structure of matter itself. But this is not all. The dimensions of the areals, the spacing, and the area covered are all vital requirements necessary to tune our world into the cosmos. The length of each side of the grid antenna is 130.1691208 minutes of arc, or 149.89171 statute miles. Therefore, the area covered by the grid would be 16944 square minutes of arc, or square nautical miles. The harmonic of mass, gravity, and communication. The number of rectangular areas enclosed by the grid antenna, not including the center square, would be 288. The harmonic of 2c, where c equals the speed of light. Each small square section would have a side length of 6.944 minutes of arc, or nautical miles. This value is the harmonic reciprocal of the speed of light. 6.944 nautical miles is equal to 7.99612 statute miles, or 8 miles. So it appears that if the areals are spaced at 7.9912 statute miles, and the sides of the square covered by the system are 149.928694 statute miles long, our areal would be closely tuned to the structure of the atom. Any signal transmitted by such a system should, in theory, travel a great distance into space. Hello, neighbor. Since publication of this chapter, the construction of the antenna system has become an environmental issue and the project has been postponed. Latest information suggests that the project may be shifted to a site near Crystal Falls in Wisconsin. Given the aerial length and site position also indicate similar harmonic associations. And we have a diagram here where it's showing pretty much the distance and everything. So let's take a look at that real quick. So you have 180 degrees west longitude, you have the great circle, the theoretical antenna position, and on the other side, longitude 98 degrees, 11 feet, 56 inches west. You have position B, you have position A, and then you have the latitude 30 degrees, 36 feet north. And you have Austin, Texas over there. Alright, let's continue on. The grid description says, showing the geometric relationship of the underground antenna to grid harmonics. The latitude displacement to North Pole equals 59.4 degrees. Latitude displacement to equator equals 30.6 degrees. And the difference is 28.8 degrees. Relative displacement equals 288 harmonic minus 2c. Distance A minus B, 4116.36 minutes of arc. This value squared equals 169,444 harmonic. The value 169,444 has been found to have connections with the harmonics of mass, gravity, and communications. The number of rectangular areas enclosed by the grid antenna, not including the center square, is 288, the harmonic of 2c, where c equals the speed of light. The number of amplifiers shown by dots at each aerial intersection is 324. This harmonic is shown in various ways throughout the book. 8 times 6.9444 equals 55.555. We have one more diagram here. Alright, so diagram 11. Hey, Texas Learning, good to see you. So if you're a little lost with this, I'll just say that this is giving us a visual example of how the grid system's laid out with these antennas. It'll make more sense as we go along. Alright. So below the diagram 11 it says, showing theoretical grid structure of underground antenna for resonating the earth, dimensions of grid antenna in minutes of arc. A is 55.555, in parentheses it says 55.555 squared equals 3086.358025, the reciprocal of 324. B equals 130.1691208. C equals 18.489. D is the center of grid aerial position, and the square of 130.1691208 is equal to 16944. So again, this was showing a grid antenna and the way that it's laid out. And really what was more important, I think, is on this bottom portion. That's the end of chapter 13, so let's get into chapter 14. Where have all the flyers gone? Just checking the chat here. Hey, Joel Burgess, good to see you. He says he's just out night fishing and wild camping. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, we got people watching from all over here, so it's good. We're getting some cool information today. Alright, so this next chapter is going to be pretty interesting. Especially, we're getting into the UFO grid system now. The next two chapters for today. So let's get to it. Chapter 14. Where have all the flyers gone? The 5th of December, 1945. A flight of 5 Avenger torpedo bombers of the United States Navy took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and flew out over a fairly calm sea. The weather conditions were clear. The time was exactly 10 minutes past 2 when the leader roared down the runway, closely followed by the 4 other aircraft in the formation. Cruising off at 215 miles per hour, the flight was slowly lost to view as the bombers winged their way out on an easterly course over the Atlantic. The plan filed by the flight leader showed that the proposed course would take the formation 160 miles east toward the Bahamas, then north for 40 miles, then finally back onto a direct course that would bring the 5 aircraft back to the Naval Air Station. In less than 2 hours, the flight would be completed, the planes back on the ground. But those 2 hours were to drag on into a nightmare for the crews of the aircraft, and they were not to see their base again. That flight has gone down in the annals of Air Force history as the greatest air mystery of our time. Word came from the formation at 3:45 p.m. when a strange radio message was received in the operations control tower at Fort Lauderdale. The flight leader spoke in a bewildered manner. He was obviously worried. He radioed, quote, "We seem to be off course. I'm not sure of our position," end quote. More calls were received over the next hour, and each time the leader seemed increasingly at a loss to what was happening to his flight, and as to where it was. Around 4 o'clock that strange afternoon, a brief radio conversation was heard by the listeners in the control tower. The flight leader, by the sound of it, was beginning to panic. He had turned over the command to another pilot. The last message from the now overdue flight was received at 4:25 p.m. The message said, quote, "Our position still not certain. Believe we are about 225 northeast of base." With the receipt of this oblique message, a Martin Mariner flying boat, equipped with rescue and survival equipment, was hurriedly made ready and dispatched to the position estimated for the Avengers in order to guide them home. Meanwhile, the control tower was desperately trying to raise the flight commander, but no more was to be heard from him or from any of the other pilots. It was as though the flight had never taken place. The anxious tower operators then tried to contact the Mariner, that had been sent off to help the Avengers find their way home. There was no response. Communication with all 6 aircraft were lost. I want to say they're talking about Flight 19, which we've covered in the Bermuda Triangle Deep Dive series. But this is Coral Castle, and these instances are popping up here. So let's continue. By now, the operations personnel were thoroughly alarmed. The Coast Guard at Miami were contacted, and almost immediately, a Coast Guard rescue plane was sent off to follow the path of the other aircraft. After a thorough search of the last estimated position of the Coast Guard pilot reported back that no sign of the 6 missing planes could be found. Surface craft were sent out, and the area was searched throughout the night. By morning, there were 20 vessels methodically scouring the sea, and soon they were joined in the air by 240 search aircraft. 240 search aircraft, flying in a pattern from Florida to the Bahamas. For 2 days, an unceasing search was kept up. The area, scrutinized by sea and air as it had never been searched before, extended up to 300 miles from the coast over the Atlantic and 200 miles into the Gulf of Mexico. Not a single trace of the 6 missing planes were found. The search area was then shifted to the inshore areas and around the sinister Everglades, and the faint hope that the aircraft had, for some inexplicable reason, flown inland. Before it was over, the search operation covered some 250,000 square miles to become the most intensive air-sea search ever undertaken, but the results remained negative. The 6 aircraft had disappeared as though they had vanished from this earth or into another dimension. We are talking about Flight 19 here. At last, with the search crews exhausted, the Navy reluctantly called a halt to the hunt. But search teams continued to rake through land areas, the beaches, and the Bahama Islands themselves. For weeks, all debris cast up on the beaches, every item of flotsam was minutely examined in the dying hope of finding some tiny clue, some tiny part of any one of the 6 missing planes. Nothing was found. Months later, a Naval Board of Inquiry formally stated that no trace of the missing planes or their crews had been found, and that no adequate theory could be put forth to explain their disappearance. An analysis made afterwards to try to determine the most probable position of the aircraft at the time they disappeared only helped to deepen the mystery further. Had the flight of Avengers continued on a direct course to the east, the air crews would eventually have made contact with Great Asako Island. If they had gone northeast, they would have flown over Grand Bahamas Island, which is about 25 miles in length. Had they continued in a southeasterly direction, they would have sighted Andros Island, or any one of a great number of smaller islands scattered about that area. In fact, the only completely open areas were almost directly north and south, and it is most unlikely that either of these courses was followed by the missing 6 aircraft, since they were known to have flown off from the airfield in an easterly direction in accordance with their flight plans. At no time did any of the crew members indicate that land was within sight in the radio messages received. In accounts of this incident, it has always emerged that the crews were confused and apparently disoriented, almost as though they were flying in a void. They seemed to not know whether they were flying straight and level or upside down. Sea and sky appeared to be as confused as if the crews had stumbled through a hidden doorway and had entered a topsy-turvy world with its own rules. The only possible explanation seemed to be that for some unknown reason, the formation had been flying along a circular course within the ring of the surrounding islands. Otherwise, it was argued, at some stage they would surely have sighted land. Since there were 5 aircraft in the missing formation, the chances of the navigation equipment in every one of them being faulty were so remote as to be an impossibility. So they're just saying that for everything to be faulty in this situation is very, very unlikely. All equipment had been thoroughly checked out and passed as fully serviceable before the exercise. In the event of any disaster of whatever nature, at least one of the 5 aircraft would have time to send out a distress signal. All aircraft and crew were equipped with survival gear for use in the event of a crash landing or an enforced ditching in the sea. The same thing was true of the missing Martin Mariner, and moreover, this particular aircraft was bulging with survival equipment. If all 6 aircraft had crashed somewhere or gone into the water, some trace, some item of wreckage would eventually have been picked up. Yet nothing has ever turned up. Not the tiniest trace. The records of the incident are still open, and to this day no logical explanation has ever been put forward to account for the mysterious events of that December day. In my earlier publication of Harmonic 695, I had put forth the theory that the aircraft had flown into an area of space-time instability due to the partial destruction of the world grid in ancient times. This is some beefy information we're getting here in this chapter. I'll reread that. In my earlier publication, Harmonic 695, I had put forth the theory that the aircraft had flown into an area of space-time instability due to the partial destruction of the world grid in ancient times. Now that I am aware that the grid system is a natural manifestation due to the formation of matter itself, I have checked the known facts once again and estimated the flight path by computer analysis. At the time of my earlier findings, I did not believe that our own scientists had the knowledge to set up any type of experiment which could have had any effect whatsoever on the flight of the Avengers. So the disappearances were thought to be caused by forces beyond our control. Now, many years later, the evidence at hand indicates, without much doubt, that the scientists did have a great deal of theoretical knowledge concerning the structure of space-time, and that various experiments were being carried out in order to verify the unified nature of our reality. The flight plan filed by the flight leader, on close analysis by computer, now reveals a strong possibility that the Avengers were part of an advanced scientific experiment set up by our own scientists. If this were so, then the crews of the aircraft were probably not aware of it. If anything went wrong, or if indeed the experiment was a success, they would, under the circumstances, be deemed expendable. The fact that the radio transmissions from the aircraft gave no indication that the crew members were aware of the cause of their predicament suggests that the experiment, if it took place, was known only to those who set it up. The filed flight plan showed the following possibilities. The proposed course would take the formation 160 miles east towards Great Abaco Island, then north for 40 miles, and then finally back onto a direct course that should take them to the Naval Air Station. If we take these coordinates and transpose them into very close grid equivalents of minutes of arc, or nautical miles, then 160 statute miles, the flight plan, could be 159.93256 statute miles, which is the grid, which converts to 138.8888 nautical miles, or minutes, on the grid, which is equal to 69.4444 times 2, or twice the speed of light reciprocal harmonic, 694,444, and 40 statute miles, which was the flight plan, could be 39.983139 statute miles, which is the grid, which converts to 34.7222 nautical miles, or minutes, on the grid, which is equal to 69.4444 divided by 2, or half the speed of light reciprocal harmonic, 347222. In return, or third, the third leg of the journey would equal 165.583 statute miles, which converts to 143.79577 nautical miles, or minutes, on the grid. The speed of light at the Earth's surface, on average, is 143,795.77 minutes of arc per grid second. A glance at diagram 12 will show that the filed flight plan closely fits the theoretical flight plan, which allows direct association with the harmonics of the unified field. So we'll look at that diagram at the end here of this chapter. In the diagram, A represents the takeoff point at Fort Lauderdale, B represents the turning point near Gorda Cay, and C equals the turning point for home near the Downer Cays. At the first turning point, B, the aircraft would be at a distance of 3,229.8793 minutes of arc from North Grid Pole B. This converts to 53.8313 degrees. The cosine of this angle equals 0.5901645. The reciprocal of this value equals 1.69444. Harmonic 169,444. This harmonic is associated with mass and gravity. If, at the time the aircraft reached these turning points, a pulsed harmonic transmission was broadcast from a strategically placed ground station or stations. It is possible that a unified field effect could have been caused at these positions. It is also possible that advanced electronic equipment could have been placed in the aircraft without the knowledge of the crews. Admittedly, the theory is pure speculation, but the flight plan fits, and I have a feeling that this is more than just coincidence. As I said in my initial publication, I believe that all aircraft were completely disintegrated or moved through time-space. Where, may we ask, have all the flyers gone? Do they still exist in some kind of a space warp? Were our own people responsible? So we're going to take a look at this grid here. Alright, firstly we have the map. Map 6 says map showing estimated intended flight path of 5 Avenger aircraft from Fort Lauderdale on December 5th, 1945. Trying to get this to focus, just bear with me. But you can see over here, here's Fort Lauderdale. There we go, we got... Yeah, this map's a little hard to focus in on here. I apologize. Okay, so you see Fort Lauderdale there with Boca Raton. We got the Great Bahama Island up at the top. Great Abaco Island. And Sandy Point. So they were flying in a triangle. And they disappeared. And then the diagram we were talking about earlier. This says showing estimated flight of Avenger aircraft at the time of disappearance, December 5th, 1945. So they started here at point A at Fort Lauderdale. And then that was the next plotted point for them to turn. And then C. And then I forget what that D was again. So, but yeah, this is the general flight path that they were told to take. And they never came back. So that's the end of chapter 14. We have one more chapter left. But let's see the chat here. Joel says he had some big fish. It's where he's fishing, it's full of big fish. That's awesome. Joel says, being ex-military, it sounds like a cover-up. Yeah, this Flight 19 situation does seem like that. And hey, Beyond the Box, good to see you. Great to have you here. Alright, we're 55 minutes in. We have 9 pages left to go. Won't be too much. But that's chapter 15. I promise I'll do 3 chapters today, since they're all pretty short. So chapter 15, people we would like to know more about. Let me just readjust all of these windows here. Alright. Oh, Beyond the Box. Beyond the Box in here with a super chat of $10. Holy moly. Thank you, Brenda. I really appreciate that. Very cool. Thank you. I appreciate the support here. Alright, so chapter 15. You know, actually, before I start, Beyond the Box did say something in their super chat. They said, "Hi, Steve." So I just wanted to acknowledge your message in there. Thank you, Brenda. Yes, thank you. Okay, so chapter 15. People we would like to know more about. Startling though it was to have found a network of man-made aerials built into the UFO grid system, some of the subsequent events were bizarre. Up to this time, I had been aware of treading on the corns of a few faceless technicians and other parties who had some connection, scientifically or politically, with the UFO grid. It had to be only a matter of time before the corns were inflamed enough to bring their possessors out into the open. So far as I was aware, no direct action had been taken to prevent me from proceeding with investigations connected with my theories, or to try and stop my constant probing into the network. Like all the best ordered secret societies, the group had given no positive indication that they even existed. So long as the public at large did not insist upon answers to controversial questions, the group's members, whoever and wherever they were apparently content to let matters quietly take their own course, no doubt hopeful that eventually I would be branded as just another crank, and that anything I had to put forward would automatically be discounted. I was fully aware that there was a possibility that I would be written off as a crank, but I soon decided that this was a chance I would have to take anyway. Obviously, I had to be fairly careful how I handled information I was now receiving. If I pushed too hard, I would almost certainly be regarded as a grade A lunatic. On the other hand, if I kept all the information to myself, I would lose any advantage I might have gained, and I would be placing myself in a position that could prove to be quite dangerous. Other investigators of UFO phenomenon in the past have disappeared or or have been victims of strange incidents as a result of probing too deeply into the so-called flying saucer enigma. For these reasons, I decided that my best course was to leak information out as it came into my hands, and also to filter out copies of all my notes through a loose-knit chain of contacts both within and outside New Zealand, so that it would be impossible to stop this truth from spreading. All the evidence so far gathered would be in the hands of certain newspapermen, so that it could be transmitted via the wire services immediately any move was made to stop my investigations. If any move. So there was a typo in this book. If any move was made to stop my investigations. I had no intention of becoming involved in some weird cloak and dagger game. Certainly, I have never regarded my investigations as either a game or a harmless hobby. I am also deeply aware of just how seriously the, quote, group, unquote, is about maintaining secrecy over their activities. In fact, I took some pains to keep the group informed about the network I had set up to ensure that all information would quickly be disseminated in the event of some untoward accident coming my way. There were a few people whom I was certain had direct connections with the group, if they were not members themselves. Through these people, I let the word go out as to the precautions I had taken. One of them scornfully suggested that he could not believe any journalist would sit on such hot news when it might be possible for him to get a scoop on the news services of the world. My answer to him was, quote, "Test the truth of what I have told you by trying to stop me in my investigations," end quote. So far, the test has not been made. Perhaps he realized that after all, there are more honest and dedicated men in this world than we sometimes think. At any rate, the scheme appeared to be working very well. I found out that the public, instead of labeling me as crazy with first-class honors, actively encouraged my research into the UFO mystery. Letters came every day from many parts of the world after the publication of Harmonic 33. The majority of them enclosed useful information or offered further suggestions for lines of investigation. Only rarely did a letter turn up in my box that assassinated my character or intimated that I was off my trolley. It was clear that a large slice of the reading public knew that there had been something going on which they were not being properly informed about. On reflection, I think it was this flood of encouragement that came through my post box, more than anything else, that drove me on with my investigations. By nature, I have a strong streak of curiosity, but it helps a lot more than I can estimate to find that there are many people around who are anxious to help in any way they can. When we photographed the first UFO transmitter, which I found to have a connection with the UFO grid, though our opposition must have blown their cool. We had made 10 prints of the photos, and these were in my possession when, a few days later, I was scheduled to carry out an airways flight to New Zealand's South Island. On the night of March 16th, 1968, I was to stop over in the capital, in Wellington, and on the next day, fly to Invercargill, New Zealand's southernmost city, returning the following day, March 18th, via various centers throughout the country. I was well aware of the significance of the photographs we had taken, and I considered it unsafe to leave them at my home while I was absent. I had stowed them into my Airways brief bag and during my stay in Wellington, I contacted the American Embassy's air attaché. I had told them, or him, the whole story, stressing that the photographs were in my possession. Until this time, in fact, I had passed a great deal of information to the Americans by way of the embassy. There had been 5 personal discussions with the air attaché at his office in Wellington up to this time. At first I had thought that the embassy's interest in my research was because I found something new. As time went by, I realized that this was not the case. On the contrary, it soon became clear to me that the scientists were well ahead of anything that I had been able to discover. So the embassy's interest was more in order to keep tabs on what I might be finding, and to see if I did happen to come upon something that the scientists did not already know. I was content to go along with this situation because I believed that everything I did, discovered, or theorized should be kept in the open. If, on the other hand, the Americans or anyone else wanted to keep their findings a secret, well, that was their business. I felt that once it was known that I had acquired a certain level of knowledge, they would have to admit something of the state of their own research, even if to do so was only in an attempt to dissuade me from continuing my own line of research. The air attaché, in fact, turned out to be a valuable source of information, help, and encouragement. It was he who assured me that my calculation of the UFO grid pattern for the global system was correct. Among other items he passed on to me, intensive UFO research was being carried out at Wright-Patterson Airfield in the United States. The scientific laboratory there, set up for the purpose, was described as a complex of buildings covering a large area and staffed by many of the world's top scientists. Experimental work was carried out 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. At one stage, the official asked me if I would consider a trip to America to visit this base. Naturally, I said I would, anytime they cared to put out an invitation. Perhaps the idea was vetoed in the States, for I heard no more of this. In retrospect, it seems to me that although at that time I was in the very early stages of my UFO research, perhaps I had already stumbled onto something that was of deep interest to the American scientists. They must have realized that I was beginning to uncover information which they themselves had kept carefully hidden from the general public for many years. The following night after this visit to Wellington, having taken pains to inform my embassy contact that I had the photographs of a transmitter with me, I stayed at the Grand Hotel in Invercargill. What took place there that night convinced me that there were other people in New Zealand besides myself who were keenly interested in our camera work. They are some of the people I would like to know more about. After a leisurely dinner, my co-pilot and I retired to the lounge for a chat and a cup of coffee. On this particular night, there were 2 complete air crews staying at the Grand. Members of the other crew were based in Wellington, and for some reason, which is still a mystery to me, the rostering section of the airline had switched the Wellington co-pilot onto my flight for the next day, while my Auckland co-pilot was to return with the Wellington crew on the early morning flight. We were not informed of this switch until after we had arrived in Invercargill earlier that afternoon. The co-pilot originally with me was most upset over this, as it interfered with some of his personal arrangements and also meant his getting up very early the following morning. To verify the situation, I telephoned Wellington and was told that the Wellington co-pilot was to crew the flight with me as far as the capital, while another Auckland co-pilot would carry on from there back to Auckland with me. I thought the whole thing rather odd. It meant that 3 crew members would be chopping and changing to do the work of 2 men. However, it was not really my concern, so I okayed the change and told my original co-pilot of his tough luck. The Wellington co-pilot, chatting with me over coffee in the Grand's lounge, had been interested in my research, he said. So I brought out the photos of the aerial from the bag in my room to show him. Before he joined the airline as a pilot, this man had been associated with the DSIR, or the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, and had carried out duties in the Radio Research Division at McMurdo Sound in the Antarctic. I thought he might be able to tell me what range of frequencies the aerial arrangement in the photographs might be operating on. We were soon deep into a discussion on this point. He tried to persuade me that the aerial was a completely mundane affair, in common use among ham operators for normal transmissions. Suddenly, we were interrupted by a tall, conservatively dressed man who had wandered over from the company of 2 similarly attired gentlemen sitting around a table some distance away from us at the center of the lounge. This sounds like the Men in Black. You got 3 agents coming up to him. Just before the stranger came to a halt at our table, I had slipped the photographs back into their large envelope, and this was now resting on my lap. So I'm sure he was unable at any time to see that the photographs were related to broadcasting equipment. Moreover, the table at which he had left his 2 friends was quite some distance away, and certainly he would have been out of earshot. He asked me if we were talking about duck shooting, and if we were interested in that sport. Somewhat nonplussed at this gambit, I told him we had no interest in ducks or any other kind of sporting birds, and that we were in Invercargill for reasons quite unconnected with shooting. Then I asked him if he was staying in the hotel. He said that he was. He had, he said, a farm some miles distant from Invercargill, and he and his wife, of whom there was no sign, were in town to celebrate their wedding anniversary. This certainly seemed odd to me, and the sensation I was experiencing that this was no ordinary casual hotel lounge encounter increased when the stranger drew up a chair and sat down with us, intent on carrying the conversation on for some time. I studied him more closely. He was aged between 45 and 50, over 6 feet tall and well built, although rather slim for his height. His features were on the rugged side, and his face roundish. A small fold of skin under the lower lip gave one an impression that at some time he might have been in a minor accident or suffered facial burns that required slight surgery. His hair was dark, slightly grayed, and thinning. His eyes light-colored and conveying an impression of considerable intelligence. His hands were long-fingered and strong, but not as rough as one would expect in a farmer. He wore a dark suit and black shoes. The suit was of conservative cut, well tailored, though from a material I would describe as coarse, almost cheap. Perhaps this was one of the factors that made me feel he was odd. After talking for a while about ducks, he suddenly switched the conversation onto an entirely different channel. He asked if we were interested in ham radio or radio stations. Trying not to show my surprise, I told him we were not particularly interested. Privately, I began to wonder how I could get rid of him without being obviously rude. He continued to insist that we must be interested in radio. He said he had a friend not far out of town who had a ham radio setup, and if we were to go with him, we would be very intrigued with the equipment. I tried to tell him that we were not very interested in radio, and that as it was now after 9 o'clock, we certainly did not feel like taking a trip out of town to see a ham operator's gear. He then countered with the information that he knew someone in a local government radio station, and would we care to go with him to meet his friend there and discuss radio matters with him. By this time, my co-pilot was looking distinctly uneasy. Suddenly, he stood up and excused himself, disappearing into the TV lounge. This left me alone with the stranger, wondering how best I could get rid of him without making a scene about it, and at the same time, getting my envelope of precious photographs into a safe place. Finally, I made it clear to him that I was not prepared to leave the hotel for any reason. He at once asked me to write down the name of his friend at the government radio station on the envelope on my lap so that I could visit him next time I found myself in Invercargill with nothing better to do. It seemed to me that he wanted to put a name on the envelope so that he would be able to claim it as his if somehow he could get possession of it. Needless to say, I kept a firm hand on the envelope as he talked on. From the conversation that followed, I gathered that on the previous evening, he had been aboard an American ship, which was in the port at Bluff, and had had a few drinks with the captain in his cabin. He hinted that if I were interested, I could go with him now to visit the ship. He did not explain how he had met the American captain, or how he had managed to get aboard the ship. This omission added to my suspicions, and I made up my mind to get rid of him. I stood up rather abruptly and excused myself, saying that I had some urgent business to attend to, and made to walk away. He became apologetic and did his best to keep me talking. He said he hoped he had not embarrassed me or my friend in any way. I left him then, and walked through the lounge past his two friends, who were still sitting at their table downstairs to the main office. His two companions looked like businessmen. They had been keeping an eye on us all this time. At the office downstairs, I asked the receptionist for some scotch tape, and with it I firmly sealed the envelope, the photographs securely inside it, writing my name boldly on the front and back. I had the receptionist place it in the hotel safe, explaining that I would pick it up just before I left the following day. The task completed, I went back upstairs and let myself into a public telephone box at the top of the stairs, just outside the entrance to the main lounge and the smaller TV room. I put through a toll call to Auckland and spoke to my wife. I told her some of the odd events of the night and asked if she had been disturbed. She told me that some friends of ours were with her and that nothing unusual had happened. Immediately after this brief conversation, I went into the TV lounge to talk to my co-pilot. He told me that the three strangers had left a short time before by the stairway to the ground floor and the main entrance of the hotel. Back down the stairs, I went to ask the receptionist who the three men were who had just left, to ask whether they were staying in the hotel. All I got was a blank look. Who was I referring to? There were no men of that description staying in the hotel. She had been at the desk the whole time. No one had passed her office. No one had gone out of the main doors. In full view of her desk and less than 10 feet away. Anyone leaving by the stairs from that first floor would have had to leave by those doors. There was no other exit. Doors leading into the bars at the back of the ground floor were locked at this time of night. The only other means of egress would be from the first floor upward by means of the fire escapes. I was beginning to feel as confused as the girl was looking. I went back up the stairs once more and asked my co-pilot if he were certain that the men had left by the main stairs. From his seat he could see the top of the staircase quite clearly, and he confirmed that they must have left by the main entrance just a short time before. How had they come into the hotel, And how did they leave? How did they pass the front of a receptionist without being seen? Who were they? And what were they after? I am positive that our darkly clad friend was no more a local farmer than I am. I still wonder frequently what would have happened if I had left with them and taken that offered trip to the radio station outside of the city. A few days later, I was again passing through Wellington. I contacted the United States Embassy and told the air attaché of the incident. I added that I was aware that I was being kept under observation and that if any of the people who contacted me were overseas agents, my advice to him was to see to it that they stopped bothering me. The New Zealand government at this time was fully aware of my activities and had given me written approval of my research. If anyone caused me trouble, I told them, I would immediately make known all the facts, the evidence, the theories, everything I had put together so far. The attaché was sympathetic and asked for more details about my encounter with the three strangers in Invercargill. Later on, he confirmed that an American training ship had been at Bluff over the period I was there, but no more information than that was forthcoming. The three men were not New Zealanders, I'm sure. Wherever they were from, though, remains their secret. During an operational flying period, it is necessary each day to have a full crew on standby duties at the airfield to allow unforeseen crew changes due to sickness or accidents. One morning in February 1969, I was carrying out a 4-hour stretch of one of these duties. Over morning tea with some other crew members in the upstairs cafeteria of the Manjeri Airport, Auckland terminal building, I was the victim of another odd occurrence. Not far away from where we sat at another table was an unusual-looking couple busily examining an expensive camera, laughing over its mysteries like a pair of children. At first, I gave them little more than a casual glance and was half turned away from them, talking to a captain having a quick coffee before flying an airliner south to Wellington. After some moments of conversation, I turned around. For some reason I have never been able to fathom, to look directly at the two who were still fussing over their camera. At the precise instant that I turned to face them, the man raised the camera, aimed it at me, and took a photograph. Then, just as quickly, he continued to fumble with the instrument and turned it back to his companion as if the incident had never occurred, perhaps hoping that I had noticed nothing. I was so surprised by this action that I was at a complete loss as to what I should do. After all, there was nothing particularly sinister about the event. He could have been a collector of photographs of airline pilots for all I was to know. Somewhat embarrassed, I turned back and resumed the conversation with the other skipper, at the same time wondering why a complete stranger would want to take my photograph. They were certainly an uncommon-looking couple. He was a tall, gangling sort of individual with thin, pipe-stem limbs. His most startling feature was his head. It was almost perfectly spherical, and it was as bare of hair as a billiard ball. The skin was a golden tan color, and very smooth. The color was, as I imagined, that of an American Indian to be. I imagined that he would never have any need to shave. Not only was his head round, it was small in proportion to the rest of his body. He was dressed in light-colored slacks and a bright reddish, short-sleeved, open-neck shirt. In spite of his thin body, he looked to me to be very fit and agile. She was the exact antithesis of her friend. Although slender, she was shorter than he. Her features were long, almost aquiline. She wore her jet black hair long down over her shoulders in an old-fashioned style. Her eyes were very dark and large, and accentuated by a very pale, almost pallid skin. She wore a dark skirt and blouse. She was an unusual-looking person, but in her way attractive, although in a crowd she would certainly not attract as much attention as her companion. I judged both of them to be in their early 20s. They looked friendly enough, one might even say jovial. Whatever their business, I cannot say there was at any time anything suggestive of sinister intent about them. But they worried me, and when I returned to the crew room some 5 minutes later, leaving them still engrossed in animated conversation at their table, I couldn't stop wondering who they were. After a few moments, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to go back upstairs and have another good look at them and, if possible, talk to them. I went out to the operation room door, which is in a corner of the main foyer of the terminal building, and pushed my way into the crowd milling about the nearby ticket counters, heading for the flight of stairs some 20 yards away. I had only gone a short distance through the crowd when I nearly bumped into the tall stranger who was striding in my direction. We gave each other a surprised look, and then, like a startled rabbit, he turned about and scuttled off through the crowd to disappear into the far end of the building. This second encounter took only a few seconds, and I had no chance of catching up with him without causing some sort of disturbance. Besides, I had no real reason for pursuing him. He had done me no harm, at least none that I knew of. The next best thing to do, I decided, was to have another look upstairs to see if his companion was still sitting there. If she were, no doubt he would soon be rejoining her. However, upstairs there was no sign of her. Like her friend, she had disappeared. After waiting for a few minutes, I went back to the crew room. It was on the face of it a quite trivial incident. Most people would have forgotten it within a few days. Even now, quite some time after, I find that the whole thing is still vividly etched on my mind. I'm intrigued by the questions they brought into my life. Who were they? What were they up to? Why did the man take my photograph? Why did he run off looking so very startled when we met in the crowd? And where were they from? Until now, I have found no real evidence to support the popular belief that aliens from another world are walking in our midst. Over the years, there have been many stories and some striking accounts of contact between humans and non-humans. Logic tells us that with all the evidence that there now exists pointing to sustained contact by scientists of this planet with beings connected with the UFOs that visit our skies, there has to be direct communication between humans and aliens at some level. It follows that there is every likelihood for aliens to be among us. If it turns out that there are indeed aliens here already, I would in no way be disconcerted to discover that the odd couple I encountered at the Manjuri Airport cafeteria are among their representatives. And if by some chance the round-headed gentleman who took a photograph of me or his companion should chance to read this, here is a message. I hope you will contact me and satisfy my curiosity. Why did you take the photograph? Why did you take my photograph? And what have you done with it? And that is the end of chapter 15. So I think he was dealing with men in black in that first one. They were not seen by the front desk lady entering or exiting. They weren't staying there, which is bizarre in itself. But man, what a wild thing, huh? So they clearly had interest in him and what he was doing with his work. And I would have gotten really pissed off at the person pretending they didn't know how to use a photography camera and then pointing it at me to take a picture. I would have approached them right away and been like, hey, what are you doing? You just took a picture of me. And they probably would have played it off, though. But next week's chapter will be chapter 16, The Secret of Life by Leedskalnin and Dylan's Magnetic Canopy. So this is getting into some more detailed research here. And that's about 17 pages long. So it'll run about an hour and a half to 2 hours next week. And then after that is the harmonics of humans, the builders in stone, and from Alpha to Omega. So, I mean, we're going to be getting pretty deep into this book at this point. See, after today, we're already halfway done. Over halfway. So I'll leave you with that to ponder. I'm actually surprised we briefly touched on Bermuda Triangle stuff today, but this is also related to Coral Castle, the ley lines, the energy grid. It was bound to come up at some point. Let's check the chat here. Joel says there's a lot of paranormal and UFO activity in the UK. Beyond the Box says you should get that stuff on video, Joel. And Joel says he can hear something around him. He keeps hearing trees bracketing. I want to say he meant breaking. I'm just going to write it out. Yes, Joel says he'll see what he can get on camera. I'd like to see what you get. And it's 1 a.m. there in the UK. And it's just getting stranger. 3 a.m. is the witchcraft stuff hours. And you're going to stay out there till 6 a.m., Joel? Well, we'll pray for you here for safe travels back and forth. And hey, Andreas. Andreas joined. And also Zenray. Good to see you here. Awesome. So yeah, this will do it for today. I appreciate y'all being here. Thursday will be our Bermuda Triangle show. Tomorrow is Madness Hour, so that's going to be another just spitballing type of live stream with my buddy Jeremy. It's been quite a while since we've done Madness Hour. And Brenda's actually been on I think the first Madness Hour that we did. So go check that out. It'll be at 8 p.m. Central Time. It'll be 2 hours later from today. Or if you want to look at it as 20 minutes from now, tomorrow. And other than that, there's no Saturday show for the next 3 to 4 weeks. I will be doing a new one after that time. And Sunday is our Let's Talk series. And we'll have one more of the Coral Castle shows next week, Tuesday, before I take a 2-week vacation. And that'll be that. So I really appreciate you all being here. And thank you, Ivy. Good to see you still here in the chat. So, again, that's it for today. Hope you all take care of yourselves. And until the next one, class dismissed.